Hello and welcome. This is Yon Cheku with NSM TV, bringing you the latest news. Conservative MP Marilyn Gladu has crossed over to the Liberal camp, bringing Mark Carney very close to a parliamentary majority. This development increases pressure on Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre amid internal tensions within the party. An unexpected development has shaken the political scene in Canada, changing the balance in Parliament and significantly increasing tensions among the main parties. Conservative MP from Ontario, Marilyn Gladu, has announced that she is leaving the Conservative Party to join the governing Liberals. Her decision brings the government led by Mark Carney just one seat away from a full majority in the House of Commons. In a statement addressed to her voters, Gladu emphasized the need for serious leadership and a clear plan for a stronger and more independent economy for Canada. She added that this is a moment that requires greater political cooperation and a more constructive approach to facing the country's challenges. This is the fifth case in just a few months when an MP changes political sides, and the fourth to leave the Conservatives, a clear signal of internal instability within the opposition. Prime Minister Mark Carney welcomed the move, praising Gladu's experience as a chemical engineer and a leader in international business. According to him, she will bring energy and new ideas to the governing team, at a moment he describes as a period of unity for the country. Currently, the Liberals have reached 171 seats, just one less than the minimum majority of 172. However, due to vacant seats and the role of the Speaker of Parliament, the government already has a practical advantage in controlling votes. Monday's by-elections could be decisive. Two districts in Toronto are considered safe strongholds for the Liberals, while one district in Quebec remains highly contested, as the previous result was annulled by the Supreme Court. On the other hand, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre reacted sharply, calling on Gladu to face voters in a by-election, reminding her of her previous statements against switching parties. This development represents another blow to Poilievre, who is already facing dissatisfaction within the party and staff changes. Analysts warn that his ability to keep the Conservatives united may be seriously called into question. Meanwhile, Gladu's move to the Liberals not only changes parliamentary mathematics, but also signals a new period of uncertainty and realignment in Canadian politics. U.S. President Donald Trump has harshly criticized NATO, saying the alliance was tested and failed during tensions with Iran. The statement comes on the same day he met NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte amid the crisis in the Middle East. Relations between the United States and NATO appear to have entered a new phase of tension, following strong statements by U.S. President Donald Trump against the military alliance. In a message delivered from the White House through spokesperson Caroline Leavitt, Trump stated that NATO was tested and failed during the escalation of the crisis with Iran, a statement that immediately raised questions about the future of transatlantic cooperation. These comments came precisely on the day when NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte paid a visit to the White House, a meeting that took place without much publicity but with low expectations. The crisis in the Middle East and tensions in the Strait of Hormuz have increased pressure on the alliance, exposing divisions between the United States and European allies. President Trump has repeatedly criticized European countries for lack of support, even threatening to withdraw the U.S. from NATO. According to spokesperson Leavitt, the meeting between Trump and Rutte was expected to be direct and frank, reflecting the deep differences between the sides. Meanwhile, analysts in Washington emphasize that European leaders do not believe they can change Trump's position. Expert Constance Stelzemüller from the Brookings Institution assesses that such visits mainly aim to keep dialogue open and avoid a total rupture between the U.S. and Europe. One of the main concerns for Europe remains the continuation of weapons supply to Ukraine, as well as ensuring that funds paid by European countries are used for this purpose. On the other hand, the United States has requested that countries dependent on Gulf oil take steps to unblock the Strait of Hormuz from Iran's influence. But European diplomats have made it clear that NATO countries are unlikely to get involved in military operations in that area. According to experts, NATO's mandate remains limited to the Euro-Atlantic area, which means allies are not obliged to intervene in conflicts outside this framework, especially in the absence of an official request. In this climate of tension and mistrust, the meeting between Trump and Rutte is seen more as an attempt to avoid further deterioration of relations rather than to reach a concrete agreement. The Strait of Hormuz has been completely closed, forcing oil tankers to turn back amid rising tensions. Iran's decision comes after Israeli attacks in the region and threatens global energy supplies. A dramatic development has shaken global markets and energy security as the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important maritime routes in the world, has been completely closed. According to Iranian media, Iran has stopped all movement of oil tankers in the strategic strait, forcing ships that had already begun transit to turn back toward the Persian Gulf. This decision comes at a moment of high tension, following recent Israeli attacks in Lebanon, which have escalated the situation despite the ceasefire between the United States and Iran. Data from maritime monitoring platforms show that several ships had begun passing through the strait after the ceasefire was announced. But the situation quickly changed, leading to a total blockage of traffic. It is reported that over 1,000 ships, including hundreds of tankers, loaded with oil, are still in the region waiting for a solution. Under normal conditions, their passage would take more than 2 weeks. Iranian authorities have also published new guidelines for safe navigation, warning of possible risks, such as sea mines and requiring strict adherence to designated corridors. The Strait of Hormuz is a vital artery for the global economy, as a large portion of the world's oil and gas supply passes through it. Experts warn that its closure could cause a sharp rise in oil prices and a new wave of inflation in international markets. Hundreds of Iranians gathered in Tehran for the funeral of Majid Kademi, one of the country's key security figures. Despite the ceasefire, many participants called for the continuation of war and a tougher stance against the US and Israel. In an atmosphere charged with emotion and tension, hundreds of citizens gathered in Tehran to bid a final farewell to Majid Kademi, head of intelligence of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The funeral ceremony took place on the very first day of the ceasefire, but the messages coming from the crowd were far from peaceful. With Iranian flags in their hands and patriotic chants, many participants openly expressed opposition to the halt of fighting. One of the strongest voices was that of a female participant, who declared that the war must continue until Iran is recognized as a dominant power in the region. According to her, the country must not lose a single inch of land and must remain strong until the end. In the same line, other participants accused the United States of attempts at global domination, rejecting any idea of dialogue with Washington and calling for the preservation of Iran's full independence in every field. According to Iranian media, Majid Kademi was killed in an attack that authorities linked to the United States and Israel. He was a key figure in the security apparatus with decades of experience in intelligence and counterintelligence. Kademi had taken office in 2025 after the killing of his predecessor in an Israeli airstrike. Before that, he headed the intelligence protection structure within the Revolutionary Guard and had held senior positions in the Ministry of Defense. The intelligence structure of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is considered one of the most powerful institutions in Iran, with an important role in internal surveillance and countering foreign influence. Israel has carried out the most powerful attacks on Lebanon since the start of the conflict with Hezbollah, even though the group has temporarily halted its attacks. The ceasefire between the US and Iran does not include Lebanon, leaving the conflict open and escalating. The situation in the Middle East is escalating once again as Israel has launched the heaviest attacks on Lebanon since the beginning of the clashes with Hezbollah last month. A series of explosions shook Beirut, covering the capital in smoke and causing panic among citizens. According to the Israeli army, the operation included more than 100 targets, including command centers and Hezbollah military bases in Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, and in the south of the country. Lebanese health authorities report dozens of dead and hundreds of injured, while the toll is expected to rise. The strikes have also hit residential areas, increasing concerns about civilian casualties and major infrastructure damage. These developments come at a moment when Hezbollah had temporarily halted attacks on northern Israel and Israeli troops in Lebanon, within the framework of a 2-week ceasefire between the United States and Iran. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that this ceasefire does not include Lebanon, paving the way for the continuation of military operations. This position was also supported by the White House, which confirmed that the agreement does not extend to this front. Meanwhile, another attack in the southern city of Sidon has left at least 8 dead and more than 20 injured, according to official sources. Sources close to Hezbollah confirmed that the group had suspended its attacks, but this did not stop the Israeli offensive, increasing the risk of a new escalation of the conflict. Since the beginning of the fighting in March, more than 1,500 people have lost their lives in Lebanon, while more than 1.2 million have been displaced from their homes. Israel has issued evacuation orders for about 15% of Lebanese territory, mainly in the south and in the outskirts of Beirut. Analysts warn that the situation remains extremely fragile. Even though there is a ceasefire in one part of the regional conflict, the lack of a comprehensive agreement is keeping the region on the brink of a larger escalation. Markets in Europe, including the DAX index, have fallen after a slight increase in oil prices and uncertainties over the US-Iran ceasefire. Investors are adopting a more cautious approach, worried about inflation and global stability. After a day of optimism in global markets, European stock exchanges have reversed direction, reflecting new uncertainties over the geopolitical situation and energy prices. In Frankfurt, the main DAX index has fallen by more than 1%, losing part of the strong gains from the previous day. This fluctuation comes as investors react to the slight rise in oil prices and doubts over the sustainability of the ceasefire between the United States and Iran. A day earlier, markets had reacted positively to the 2-week agreement to halt fighting, pushing the DAX index above the symbolic level of 24,000 points. However, this optimism proved short-lived. According to equity experts Team Oshner from Stubing AG, investors are now taking a more defensive stance. He emphasized that the rise in oil prices is directly affecting market decision-making, as it is a key indicator for inflation and economic developments. Meanwhile, European indices such as STOXX 600 and CAC 40 have followed the same downward trend, reflecting a general climate of uncertainty in financial markets. Although the ceasefire brought hope for stabilizing energy supplies through the Strait of Hormuz, recent developments in the region, including the continuation of Israeli strikes in Lebanon, have revived fears of a new escalation. Meanwhile, oil prices remain around 40% higher compared to pre-conflict levels, fueling concerns about a new wave of inflation in the global economy. Investors are also awaiting the release of important economic data from the United States, which is expected to provide a clearer picture of inflationary pressures and the direction of monetary supplies. Experts warn that without a stable geopolitical situation, market volatility will continue, keeping investors in a constant state of uncertainty. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is calling on the European Union to consider suspending budget rules if the crisis in the Middle East worsens. She also warns of strong measures against energy companies to curb price speculations. The crisis in the Middle East is beginning to have a direct impact on Europe's economic policies. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has called for extraordinary measures if the situation with Iran escalates. Speaking in Parliament in Rome, Meloni stressed that restoring freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz is vital for the global economy, as tensions have directly affected energy markets, raw materials, and other essential products. She warned that in the event of further deterioration of the crisis, the European Union should respond with measures similar to those used during the pandemic. In this context, Meloni suggested that the temporary suspension of the Stability and Growth Pact, which sets strict limits on member states' budget deficits, should not be considered taboo. According to her, this should not be a measure for individual countries, but a general decision for the entire European Union, in order to better cope with a potential economic crisis. At the same time, Italy is ready to take concrete steps to curb rising energy prices. Meloni stressed that the government may intervene with additional measures on the profits of energy companies, to prevent speculative behavior in the market. These statements come at a delicate moment for the Italian economy, which is under pressure to reduce its deficit below the 3% threshold of gross domestic product, in line with EU rules. However, the escalation of tensions in the Middle East and rising energy prices could make this target even more difficult to achieve. Experts assess that the decision to suspend budget rules would have a major impact on the European economy, giving governments more room to respond to the crisis, while at the same time increasing the risk of higher debt. Spain's Foreign Minister José Manuel Albares has strongly condemned Israeli attacks in Lebanon, calling them violations of the ceasefire and international law. Meanwhile, Madrid has decided to reopen its embassy in Tehran as a sign of efforts for peace. Diplomatic tensions in the Middle East are increasingly being reflected in Europe as Spain has openly come out against Israel's military actions in Lebanon. Speaking in Parliament in Madrid, Foreign Minister José Manuel Albares accused Israel of violating international law and the recently reached ceasefire in the region. According to him, the airstrikes carried out on the day the ceasefire came into force constitute an unacceptable act that threatens stability and peace efforts. Albares stressed that the situation in Lebanon has become dramatic, describing it as a shame for the conscience of humanity. He pointed to the heavy toll of the conflict, with thousands dead, wounded, and more than 1 million people displaced from their homes. At the same time, Spain has taken an important diplomatic step by deciding to reopen its embassy in Tehran. According to Albares, this decision comes at a moment when there is a new hope for peace and aims to support dialogue in the region. This move positions Spain as one of the most critical countries in the West toward the policies of the United States and Israel in this conflict. Madrid had also taken other measures, including closing its airspace to aircraft linked to military operations it considers dangerous and illegal. 4 people lost their lives after a migrant dinghy capsized near the coast of France while attempting to cross to Britain. Authorities warn the toll may rise as investigations begin. Another tragedy has struck migrants trying to cross to Britain as a dinghy has capsized in the waters of the English Channel, leaving 4 victims behind. The incident occurred near the coast of Équiham-Plage in northern France, where around 30 migrants had attempted to board a small vessel to continue their journey toward the United Kingdom. According to local authorities, the dinghy capsized in the early hours of the morning after encountering difficulties in shallow waters. All individuals ended up in the sea, while 4 of them, 2 women and 2 men, lost their lives. The mayor of the area, Christian Fourcroy, confirmed that the incident occurred while migrants were trying to reach a so-called taxi boat, a method increasingly used by traffickers to avoid police controls. Emergency forces and the gendarmerie were immediately deployed at the scene, while survivors were transported to shore and provided with thermal blankets to cope with the low temperatures. Authorities state that the situation is still under assessment and there are fears that the number of victims may increase. This incident comes at a time when traffickers are increasingly using small boats to transport migrants along the coasts of France and Belgium, picking them up from different points to take them toward Britain. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office in Boulogne-sur-Mer has opened an investigation to clarify the circumstances of the incident and identify those responsible. NASA confirms that the crew module of the Artemis II mission is in excellent condition for its return to Earth. However, atmospheric re-entry remains one of the most critical and high-risk moments for the crew. The U.S. Space Agency NASA has delivered positive news regarding the Artemis II mission, confirming that the crew module is in excellent condition as the moment of return to Earth approaches. During a press conference from the control center in Houston, NASA officials emphasized that the mission has gone well so far and that a large part of the risks have been successfully overcome. However, they warned that the most delicate phase has not yet passed. Acting Deputy Administrator Lakeisha Hawkins stated that this is a test flight and that every step of the mission is being carefully analyzed to improve future missions. She stressed that the safe return of the crew remains the main challenge. Meanwhile, Flight Director Rick Henfling explained in detail the critical moments of atmospheric re-entry. According to him, the Orion capsule will enter the atmosphere from an altitude of about 400,000 feet at a very high speed entering a phase he described as a moment when reality begins. During this phase, for about 6 minutes, there will be a total communication blackout with Earth due to the plasma that forms around the capsule. This phenomenon is normal, but remains one of the most sensitive moments of the entire mission. After exiting this critical zone, attention will shift to the deployment of the parachutes. Initially, 2 stabilizing parachutes will be activated, which will significantly reduce speed, followed by 3 main parachutes that will enable a soft landing in the Pacific Ocean. On the other hand, NASA officials have confirmed that the latest analysis of images from the crew module has not revealed any technical problems. Everything appears to be in optimal condition for the final phase of the mission. Experts emphasize that until the moment of safe landing, every detail remains critical. As Hawkins stated, while launch and travel have been successful, the greatest challenge is bringing the crew back to Earth without incident. This is all we have prepared for you today. To never miss an update, follow us on social media, subscribe on YouTube, and visit us on our website at www.nsmtv.ca. Thank you for joining us.